but I've also spoken to other members, and they're either comfortable with our decision or support it.
Yeah. Can you tell us, because you inherited the tree, and it's said that, everybody could club together and pay for the ongoing maintenance. Can you just set the record straight? The tree, in your view, is now potentially dangerous.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a gum tree. It's an exotic species. It has a reputation for dropping limbs, and there's also evidence in the media of where these sort of trees have fallen over in the past. I understand that the root ball is relatively small, so under kind of stress conditions with wind or snow or heavy rainfall, they have, or there is a track record of them falling over. So we are kind of naturally interested in the species, and then given its current size, the fact that it's potentially only half grown in size, kind of led us to the conclusion that we weren't really prepared to accept the future risk of this tree continuing.
I noticed at least one neighbour has applauded you because it's improved her view, but that's not why you are taking it down.
No. For us, I mean, the safety is a major element, and as owners who are responsible for it, there's other factors as well for us to consider, such as the responsibility, the hardships, the costs, the risks, the fact that we're mitigating the loss of it through future native tree replanting, and also that ongoing maintenance offer from some of the neighbours. There's no real guarantee that would continue indefinitely. So, for us as owners who would potentially be maintaining that tree long term, it was kind of a way up between a one-off felling cost versus ongoing maintenance costs, and then those other factors also were additional layers to be considered.
Okay. Simon, can I ask you a question? In a whole kind of my home, my castle way, does it peeve you that people feel like they could interfere with something that you wanted to do on your own property?
Yeah, it did. I mean, and I understand their perspective. It's been part of the community for a long time, and it's going to be a change to them. A number of the people I interacted with were passionate about preserving trees as a kind of in principle. So I do understand their perspective, but I made the point a number of times. It's actually not community property; it's private property, and it's our decision ultimately. So yeah, I was pretty firm that it had to be a decision that we were comfortable with as owners. And yes, we'll take the community perspective into account, but ultimately we needed to be comfortable with the decision.
It's funny how in this day and age everything to an extent becomes public in situations like this.
Yeah.
It's a sign of the time.
Simon, do you know what you'll do in its place?
Not yet. I mean, we're keen on native trees and rebuilding the flora and fauna and enhancing what's already there on the site. So I think when we do look at species, we'll probably not choose one that grows to potentially the same size or even larger. It'll be a lower height tree. But ultimately, we want to build up a nice little ecosystem there.
Well, none of us will be around for the apex of that one, but Simon, thank you. Simon Harty on his tree at Mount Pleasant. Thank you very much, Lisa Scott, Megan Nichol-Reeds.
Thanks,
Always
Jim.
a pleasure.
See you, Lisa.
See you, darling.
Good luck with your book.
Yeah,
Thank you. Good luck with your
cow.
That was an excellent end to the panel. Welcome everyone. Checkpoint tonight after 5. We're looking at the government's move to match OECD initiatives to collect more tax at revenue source from multinationals like Google and Apple. What does it mean, and how much money are we not currently collecting that we will get in the future? Also tonight we talk to the OECD about exactly the same thing. Somewhere up to $250 million a year lost to global governments. Lord and the rave reviews that single really is getting. That's not cultural cringe, it's a statement of fact. Plus, a lot happening in court today. Oratia and the loss of a community. Sessions recusing himself. Will that be enough? All of it coming up after 5.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. New Zealand First is questioning why the government took so long to unveil a plan to crack down on multinational firms which don't pay their fair share of tax. The Revenue Minister, Judith Collins, this morning revealed a series of proposals to beef up Inland Revenue's powers. The government also wants to introduce a rule stopping corporate giants shifting profits overseas if their sales are driven by staff based in this country. New Zealand First's leader, Winston Peters, says he has little confidence in the government, given it refused to accept there was a problem as recently as last year.
You've got people like Mr Joyce and Mr English who say they know what's going on, and on this matter they showed themselves to be blissfully or deliberately ignorant. Take your pick.
The earthquake-damaged Defence House in Wellington is to be demolished. The 10-year-old building on Aitken Street was badly damaged in the November 14 earthquake, and its demolition has been rumoured for weeks. Its owner, AMP Capital, told the Defence Force about the building's fate this week, saying repairs were not economically viable. The Defence Force says the building does not present any immediate risks to health and safety. It says the 900 staff evacuated from the building will be based in the nearby Freiburg building by the end of April. It says long-term accommodation options for the Defence Force and the Ministry of Defence are still being considered. An Auckland school says it's having to dip into its capital funding in order to maintain its school pool. According to the Ministry of Education, about 1,300 schools have pools. That's 60% of all schools. The Water Safety Chief Executive, John Campbell, says over the past 5 years, about 156 school pools have closed and 130 are still at risk. The Ministry of Education's Pauline Cleaver says schools get extra funding and may also use their capital funding for pool maintenance. The principal of Glen Innes School, John Hendricks, says the extra money doesn't cover the costs and his school hasn't received any of the funding since 2015.
Which is unfortunate because the onus then falls back on us to find that money within our operation grant to be able to fund the things we need to do, both not only the pool but also the rest of the academic program.
Principal John Hendricks. A Crown witness has denied beating a woman with a cricket wicket despite her DNA being found on the weapon. Jacqueline Keats is giving evidence at the High Court in Auckland, where Nicola Jones is accused of masterminding the kidnapping of the woman she believed had slept with her boyfriend. Keats has admitted her part in the attack and is serving a prison sentence. She told the court she was with Ms Jones, Michelle Blom and Julianne Torrance in Auckland City when they pulled a teenager off the street and took her back to Miss Blom's West Auckland address. Keats said once there, the woman was stripped and had her hair cut. She was then also sexually violated. Under cross-examination, Ms Jones's lawyer, Maria Pekatik, asked Keats why her DNA was found on the wicket.
Well, yeah, I don't know how it is, but maybe I touched it down there, I don't know.
But isn't it the case that you're just minimising your role in that regard and you used one of them?
No.
Keats will continue to be cross-examined on Monday. The Canterbury District Health Board is bringing its catering back in-house. The board has announced it will not be renewing its contract with the multinational food giant Compass Group, which ends in June. Logan Church reports.
The District Health Board's Chief Executive, David Meats, says doing its own catering will save money and give them control over the food on offer. Food services include hospital meals for patients, cafes and the Meals on Wheels service. Mr Meats says the public shouldn't notice any changes as the Health Board takes over its food services at the start of July. And he says the board intends to offer jobs to all 300 Compass employees currently working at its sites. Compass is one of the world's biggest catering companies and currently supplies nearly half of all public hospital meals in New Zealand. Ko Logan Church, Tēnei.
Compass Group says the end of its contract has nothing to do with their product's quality. Its Chief Operating Officer, Julian Baldy, says the Health Board will be using the systems and facilities Compass Group developed when they take over in July. It's 5:04. The Blues coach Tana Umanga says All Black lock Patrick Tuipulotu is excited about his return to rugby tonight. Tuipulotu is on the bench for the Blues game against the Chiefs in Hamilton. His career was in limbo after he initially failed a drugs test on the All Blacks end-of-year tour. That was overturned last month. Umanga says Tuipulotu has been impressive at training.
He's been very excited and trained the house down to get himself ready for this moment. So, without putting too much pressure on him, we just want to get him out there and get him back into what he enjoys and why he's here. So, it should be good.
Tana Umaga. Meanwhile, the All Black Sevens side will be without captain Scott Curry for the fourth leg of the World Series starting tomorrow in Las Vegas. He's been ruled out with concussion. The New Zealand women's team have made just one change to their team for the Las Vegas leg, with Renee Wycliffe replacing the injured Katarina Fata-Simpkins. Off-spinner Jitan Patel and all-rounder Jimmy Neesham have been recalled to the New Zealand Test cricket squad for their 3-test series against South Africa starting in Dunedin next week. Parramatta forward New Zealander Kenny Edwards has been suspended for the first 7 games of the National Rugby League season after pleading guilty to domestic violence-related assault charges. The Eels also slapped him with a $60,000 fine after the 27-year-old admitted spraying his former partner with water and pouring alcohol over her last December. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, RNZ Music is invited to Wainoia Mata to witness the Wellington Kapahaka group Ngā Taonga Mai Tawhiti prepare for the biggest event in the Māori performing arts calendar. Country Life heads to a farm near Taihape to witness the harvest of New Zealand's only commercial quinoa crop, and in Sonic Tonic, we're featuring angry music by women. On Nights with me, Megan Whelan, in for Brian Crump after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the Met Service short forecast to midnight tomorrow. Northland fine weather but isolated afternoon showers. Auckland, Coromandel and Waikato, but also Wellington and Wairarapa fine today but cloudy for the rest of the North Island. Fine for Nelson and Marlborough. Bulla and Westland showers turning to rain in Westland for a time. Fine spells tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago cloud increasing today with scattered showers south of Banks Peninsula. Fine tomorrow. Southland and Fiordland rain turning to a few showers this evening and becoming confined to Fiordland and the south coast. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It is 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much, Anna Thomas. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to have your company. Coming up tonight, from Russia with love, as yet another denial of contact with Russia falls apart. The US Attorney General recuses himself from precisely the investigation into Russian interference his department is running. Lord is back, and it seems to be triumphantly. We talked to the Rolling Stone, and the biggest single cause of death on the planet is sold commercially and legally at a shop very near you. But we begin with the tax man or woman who may be picking more apples. Yes, the government is moving to catch OECD initiatives, or match OECD initiatives to collect more tax and revenue source from multinationals like Google and Apple. This is an announcement that Winston Peters says was some time coming, too late. The government estimates somewhere in the region of $300 million a year is currently not being collected from multinationals who use legal means to move profits out of New Zealand and costs into New Zealand, thus reducing their tax bill here. The OECD estimates that globally the practice costs governments a total of, and I quote, between 100 and 240 billion US dollars annually in foregone taxes. Later on Checkpoint, we'll talk to the Minister, Judith Collins, on why this is happening now, how it will work and what it all means. But first of all, here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
Unveiling the plans this morning in Queenstown, the Revenue Minister Judith Collins was talking tough on global dodging.
We mean business.
Among the proposals, a rule preventing corporate giants from shifting profits overseas if their New Zealand sales were driven by staff based in the country. Also on the agenda, more muscle for inland revenue.
IRD is being given more powers to investigate, more powers to make decisions, more powers to assess.
That means if a multinational is being uncooperative, IRD can determine how much tax it should pay unless the company can prove otherwise. A PwC tax expert, Jeff Nightingale, says the plan certainly has teeth. He says, in fact, they may be too sharp.
How do you define an uncooperative company? And that's where they have to be very careful, because once someone gets deemed uncooperative, then some quite strong powers come to play around the Commissioner's ability to demand information, make a tax assessment and collect the tax.
Judith Collins says Inland Revenue reckons about $300 million a year is being lost because of multinational tax avoidance in New Zealand. EY's Executive Director, David Snell, says the measures will probably force some companies to restructure their New Zealand operations and may add to the cost of doing business.
I don't think we would see a lot of businesses pulling out. We may see some investment at the margins not coming here that would have done. But if many countries adopt similar rules to ours, then the effect could be contained.
One idea that's conspicuously absent is what's called a diverted profits tax, a measure designed to penalise companies caught gaming the system. It's come into force in the UK and is expected to take effect in Australia from July. Labour's Michael Wood wants to keep the policy on the table.
One of the risks of the technical changes being proposed is they can get quite fiddly and detailed and may just open up the door to a lot of litigation. There's an argument to say diverted profit tax might just be a simpler approach. We should be exploring that properly.
But Ms Collins says the government wants to explore a different strategy first.
We're not ruling it out in the future. What we are saying is that we think that this is going to address most of the problems, and if this is successful, then we won't need to go down that track. If it's not, we're certainly not ruling out a diverted profits tax.
Labour, the Greens and New Zealand First have all broadly welcomed the plan, but have questioned why it's taken the government so long to crack down on multinational tax avoidance. The proposals now go out for consultation for about 6 weeks. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
You will have heard the Minister, Judith Collins, in that piece. We'll talk to her at length later in the program. What's being closed here is a hole in the tax nets that predates highly fluid multinationals like Apple and Google by decades, in fact. In short, these are tax laws that weren't written with base erosion and profit shifting in mind. So companies can legally declare their profits in low tax jurisdictions and their costs in higher tax jurisdictions. In 2015, I looked at the example of Apple New Zealand. Those of you who heard the resulting podcast will know that I couldn't get Apple to explain how their New Zealand costs were so high. They didn't return calls, they didn't reply to emails, and they wouldn't answer the most straightforward questions about how, in the 2014 financial year, the cost of Apple's sales in New Zealand was 96% of the revenue they earned here. Why is it so expensive to do business in New Zealand? I asked Apple dozens of times and they never answered. So I went to Pascal Saint-Amans, the director of the Centre for Tax Policy and Administration at the OECD. Now, international tax laws were written to mean you didn't pay tax on the same income twice. Fair enough. But perhaps more than anyone else on the planet, Pascal Saint-Amans has been working to make sure that isn't flipped.
International tax rules are here to provide the elimination of double taxation so that cross-border investment is not taxed twice, at source and at residence, in the headquarter company's country and where the company invests. But they are not designed to facilitate double non-taxation, meaning the location of the profit in zero tax jurisdictions where there is no activity at all. So what we have done precisely is about closing down this possibility of locating your profits in a jurisdiction where nothing is happening. We are basically realigning the location of the profits with the location of the activities. It's just putting some sense back to the system, I would say.
That is Pascal Saint-Amans, Director of the Centre for Tax Policy and Administration at the OECD. The new Lord single Greenlight has been received with pretty rave reviews in the hours after its global release, straight into the US top 10 on iTunes and moving up fast. It trended far and wide on Twitter with Katy Perry amongst the reception committee. It's the 20-year-old Aucklander's first release in 3 years. That's why it's such big news, following a debut album that contained Royals, a #1 single in the US that propelled a North Shore teenager into global stardom. And today, well, The Guardian called Greenlight big tent pop, giving it 4 stars. NME called it an unexpected euphoric rocket. The Atlantic, the venerable old Atlantic, used words like glorious bliss and joyfully. Billboard said a brilliant songwriter enters her prime at 20. Social media, more probably a reflection of her target demo, has been alight with glowing reaction. And the Rolling Stone, well, we spoke to their staff writer, BRITTANY SPANOS.
I mean, I love it. It's such a departure from Pure Heroine and everything that we've heard from Lorde so far. And I was kind of hoping that she would go in a direction that was similar to the song that she did with Disclosure last year, Magnets, which I really, really adored. And so I'm glad that she kind of went into more of this like dance pop, Robin style of music.
Yeah, it's a banging pop song, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very upbeat. I mean, her first album had a lot of darker undertones and was definitely angstier, moodier. And I mean, the lyrics of the song are about heartbreak, and they are very moody and sad. But I mean, to do this sort of like upbeat song, this like very dancey, clubby song, was such a surprise and also a very welcome one.
Lots of twists and turns in terms of the kind of work that she and Jack Antonoff are doing, the way the song segues musically. It's really interesting production, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like the piano beat beneath it is just like such a driving force and really makes it something that's so different from what you can hear on pop radio and from dance pop songs in general. I mean, that piano is like, it really carries the song in such a way that makes it even more addictive, and like I can't stop turning it off for a while today.
Yeah, that's a good thing, isn't it? So you say it's different from what you hear on pop radio. So by pop radio in the States, you're talking about, what, Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, that kind of stuff. So is this a broadening of the paradigm of that kind of music? Is she pushing at the boundaries a bit here?
Yeah, I think something that Jack Antonoff in particular has brought to pop production is a level of vulnerability that I think that like is different from the type of like Max Martin sounds that we'd hear, or like sort of these like EDM pop music that we were hearing on radio for a few years. Jack Antonoff has a much more emotional quality to his pop production, and we heard that in 1989 with some of the songs that he worked on with Taylor. But there's like this sensitivity to his dance pop, and I think that Lorde and him are a really special duo, because I think Lorde has always been really good at balancing her emotions with sort of these catchy pop tunes and really bringing herself into everything that she does and being very open and honest with all of her lyrics and with her style. And I think her and Jack as a partnership is really special and kind of really hits that sweet spot with the idea of vulnerability in pop.
Some of our listeners are going to be listening to this, and they're going to be thinking, why are you even talking about this? Because this is a news and current affairs program. What the hell is Lorde doing on it? Not all of our listeners. Lots will be delighted to hear this interview. But how big a cultural event is the release of this single, Brittany?
I think that, especially with how Lorde was received when she first came out, I mean, people were calling her the Nirvana of her generation. People were calling her this like voice of this new generation of music and of pop, especially because she was so young when she first debuted. To many people, she was sort of like this guiding light for people her age and for teenagers. And the way that she spoke about the teen experience was so honest and so real. And people were really looking forward to what she had to offer next. And especially given the amount of time that she took a few years off. She released her first album in 2013. So it's been like almost like about 3.5 years now since she released that album, and people were really looking forward to what she had to offer for her second album. And it was so funny because, I mean, just like looking at, my Twitter timeline, Twitter timelines are so becoming like what we look at for how the culture is really responding to everything. And everyone was talking about this song today. Everyone was talking about Green Light. Everyone was so excited that she was back. And we're really, even up until she released the song, people are really anticipating this new release, which is really rare to see in like a cultural moment like that. But people are really, it was a very international thing. Like everyone was really looking forward to what she had to offer about this new phase in her life, about her sort of entering adulthood, her new pop sound. And it really delivered.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of the cultural moment comparison. So even though we knew this was coming, because she started to hint broadly a week or so ago, and then the hints became very explicit about 48 hours ago. So it wasn't a total surprise like, say, Lemonade, Beyonce, but everyone has just heard it at the same time for the first time, right? And they are all responding at the same time. And she's absolutely lighting up social media globally, isn't she?
Yeah. Yeah, it was, people, they knew the time that was going to drop, and I just remember seeing people tweet about it the first few minutes before, and they're like, when does that Lorde song come? Which is really, it's really great to see that she is able to build this type of cultural moment so early in her career, and so at such a young age. It took Beyonce until, after she released her self-titled to, get to that level of cultural moment. And it's so much rarer to see a young artist hit that right now, just because of how much music we're inundated with, and with streaming culture, and with, you know, how many artists are really striving to hit that type of cult-like fame, or even like widespread fame, that a lot of the number of big artists are like very few and far between. And I love that Lorde has really hit that for herself.
Brittany Spanos from Rolling Stone. 5:20. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up, the Canterbury DHB dumps the Compass Food contract. What time should construction work be allowed to start in residential areas? The Auckland neighbours who got a 5:30 wake-up call. And Westland's mayor says any changes to BYO rules will kill off iconic community events, and he won't be having a bar of it. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and of course our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We would love a response from anyone involved in the kind of multinationals who are so frequently name-checked by the OECD as being involved in the legal business of base shifting and profit erosion, or base erosion and profit shifting. If you're listening, Google, Apple, Facebook, please do get in touch. We'd love to hear what you think of Judith Collins' announcement today. But for the sake of my health, I won't be holding my breath. It's 5:20 to Washington now, where the US Attorney General has stepped down from any investigation into alleged Russian interference in last year's presidential election. Recused has been the word of the day. In fact, you can have lots of good games with that word, but we won't mention them on air. But Jeff Sessions denied he lied under oath when he told his Senate confirmation hearing that he hadn't had any communication with Russian officials during the presidential campaign. Contradicted by, well, an increasingly heavy weight of evidence. Democrats aren't satisfied and they're calling on him to resign immediately. The ABC's Ann Barker reports.
Jeff Sessions still maintains he did nothing wrong in talking to the Russian ambassador not once but twice during the recent US election campaign.
Let me be clear. I never had meetings with Russian operatives or Russian intermediaries about the Trump campaign. And the idea that I was part of a, quote, continuing exchange of information during the campaign between Trump surrogates and intermediaries for the Russian government is totally false.
But even if the content of the meetings was relatively harmless, the allegation remains that America's most senior law enforcement official at the very least misled his Senate confirmation hearing in January when he declared under oath that he, quote, did not have communications with the Russians. Now, after legal advice from his own department and intense political pressure, Jeff Sessions has agreed to remove himself from the FBI investigation into alleged Russian interference in the US election.
And my staff recommended recusal. They said that since I had involvement with the campaign, I should not be involved in any campaign investigation. I believe those recommendations are right and just.
The decision means Jeff Sessions will play no part in an inquiry that would have to investigate his own actions. But by refusing to resign, it also means there's unlikely to be a special prosecutor appointed, as many have called for, given it's the Attorney General who'd make that call. But if Mr Sessions thinks this is the end of the matter, he's wrong. Protests in Washington before his announcement showed just how strong the sentiment is for him to resign. President Donald Trump was standing by Jeff Sessions as he prepared to step down from the FBI inquiry.
Mr. President, do you still have confidence in the Attorney General? Total.
But whatever the outcome of the investigation, political analysts say Jeff Sessions has damaged his credibility as Attorney General. Philip Carter, a senior fellow at the Centre for a New American Security, believes Mr Sessions could still face criminal liability if he's found to have misrepresented facts in his statements to the Confirmation Committee and the FBI.
As the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States, his word has to be sacred. It has to be unimpeachable. And right now, everything that Jeff Sessions says is going to carry a bit of a footnote because we can't trust that there's not some lawyerly cleverness behind that phrase like there was in his answers about Russia ties.
At least 2 more officials in Donald Trump's presidential campaign admit they too spoke with the Russian ambassador last July. J.D. Gordon, the Director of National Security for the election campaign, and Carter Page, another member of the National Security Advisory Committee, have admitted they met Sergei Kislyan on the sidelines of the Republican National Convention.
That report from the ABC. It's 25 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Protesters spilt their blood on the ground outside New Zealand's electronic spy agency today in protest at the involvement in the United States drone assassination program. They called on staff at the GCSB, the Government Communications Security Bureau, to take their lives, not lives of people in the Middle East. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
In Wellington today, several dozen protesters blocked the doors of the GCSB and spilt their blood on the ground as part of Drone Assassination Awareness Week. Spokesperson Forrest Chambers says the group is praying for the victims of the drone strikes and for the staff of the GCSB.
A number of the group have taken their own blood and have poured it out on this place in front of the GCSB. These people are saying, if you want to take lives, don't take innocent lives overseas, take our lives instead.
Mr. Chambers says the protesters are horrified by the number of people killed in Muslim countries by the US drone assassination program.
These are people in their gardens getting sent Hellfire missiles from drones, and the point of this protest today is that the GCSB is supporting that drone assassination program. So we're drawing attention to that link today.
How does the GCSB support that drone assassination
Well, we're part of the Five Eyes intelligence network, and so we're collecting signals intelligence, and we feed that to the United States military, and they use that information, well, they may use that information, we believe they do, use information to target possible suspects in the war on terror in the Middle East. Unfortunately, there's thousands of civilian casualties happening in that program.
In 2014, the then Prime Minister John Key confirmed information gathered by the GCSB could be used to identify targets for United States drone attacks. The Greens spokesperson for Defence and Disarmament, Kennedy Graham, agrees with the protesters.
That call from those people would be consistent with the Green policy that the GCSB should be disbanded under its current form, and a review undertaken of the role of the SAS and the overall intelligence and security community.
More than 2,000 drone strikes have been carried out by the United States. Last year, the US government estimated it had killed up to 116 innocent civilians in the drone strikes, a figure disputed by human rights groups. Independent estimates by the Bureau of Investigative Journalists puts the number of civilians killed between 700 and 1,400, including about 300 children. The GCSB did not respond to repeated requests for comment. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
5:27. Coming up, the headlines with Anna. But first, Westland's mayor says any changes to BYO rules will kill off iconic community events, and he won't be having a bar of it. Associate Justice Minister Mark Mitchell is taking advice about New Zealand's alcohol laws, including being able to BYO, bring your own alcohol to races and other such events. It comes after a briefing to the Police Minister, Paula Bennett, revealed police had identified alcohol at race meetings as being a serious issue. I think we can all recall some pictures along those lines. But Westland's Mayor Bruce Smith says while BYO has already been banned at race meetings in Wellington and Auckland, it's simply not a problem on the West Coast.
I am in the Murchison Cemetery, and I'm looking at this beautifully laid out cemetery, and I'm thinking, now where are we going to bury wild foods? And where are we going to bury our Camara races? And I'm moving along a bit further. There's a bunch of people that died in the 1929 earthquake, but there's a gap there. We'll put the Hokitika Racing Club in there. You take the Camara races. John, it's in its 134th year this year, and so in comes this daft legislation. Now, the headlines in our papers last year were police commend organisers, no trouble, great event, and suddenly this year we've got people coming along saying, well, I'm sorry, guys, the fact that you've bought a table and a bottle of wine or a couple of bottles of beer to the Camara races for the last 134 years means nothing. declare the entire area, the 9 acres, as a licensed premises, and because of that, your number of security people is going to go from 5 to 25. Now and so because of that, the club turns around and says, "Well, shucks, we're going to have to raise the gate fee from $10 to $15." It's just absolutely unacceptable.
So is alcohol? So the Kumara races are a BYO and licensed event. You can buy it there if you want, and you can bring it if you want. Currently,
absolutely, and there has never been an issue with it.
No, so people haven't been driving home intoxicated and being pulled over in record numbers or any of that stuff.
Oh, I think there was 2 last year, but look, as a community, we're totally focused on driving out overindulgence in drink, family violence, which ends up as part of that. We're just totally opposed to it. But one size doesn't fit all, and we've got events that are absolutely, take the Wild Foods Festival. That's worth $6.5 million.
And is that a BYO event?
No, it's not. But it's controlled by the alcohol legislation, and we've gone from if you look, I'm not a young fella, but I tell you what, I can't stand the red tape. I look at the situation where we have, you go up to the bar and you're allowed to carry 1 beer back. And if there's 4 of you, you've got to go up 4 times. You've got to go past the security man 4 times. This is not Hamilton or Auckland or Christchurch or Wellington, where you guys can't control your people at 4 o'clock in the morning. This is not one size fits all. These are events. They're critical to our economy. They're critical to keeping our community together. And I tell you what, we're not having a bar of it.
You feel quite strongly about this, don't you, Bruce?
Yes, I do. And I hope you don't take offence at the fact that I've expressed myself strongly.
No, not at all. No, not at all. We like a good opinion. We like honestly held opinion. I mean, I guess this is the point, isn't it? That there have been issues and there has to be control over very large events in a city like Auckland where there's 1.4 million people. And there needs to be a way of policing the availability of alcohol at very large events. But you're saying the Kumara races is not a very large event. It is a small community family event, and it has worked very well on these terms for over a century, and we don't want you to mess around with it.
That's it, in a nutshell. Thank you so much for that.
My pleasure, Bruce. Bruce Smith, who is the Mayor of Westland, not of Hamilton or Auckland or Christchurch, we hasten to add, where all the mongrels live, but Westland, where they are very much in control at their events. And Bruce, actually, Winston Peters is saying the same thing. This is not a one-size-fits-all rule that will work. We'd love to have your opinion on that. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Time for the sting. Coming up on the programme, a Westland community is battling really hard to save 18 homes and the financial cost of keeping a pool open at a Decile 1 school. All of that and more from Judith Collins on this move against multinationals shifting their profits offshore and moving their costs onshore. That is coming up too. But with the time at 27 to 6, here's Anna Thomas with RNZ Headlines.
New Zealand First is questioning why the government took so long to unveil a plan to crack down on multinational firms that don't pay their fair share of taxes. The Revenue Minister Judith Collins today revealed a series of proposals to beef up Inland Revenue's powers. The government also wants to introduce a rule stopping corporate giants shifting profits overseas if their sales are driven by staff based here. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says he has little confidence in the government, given it refused to accept there was a problem as recently as last year. The Defence Force has confirmed its earthquake-damaged headquarters in Wellington will be demolished. The 10-year-old Defence House on Aitken Street was badly damaged in November 14th earthquake. Its owner AMP Capital told the Defence Force about the building's fate this week, saying repairs were not economically viable. Dozens of people blocked the entrance to the Government Communications Security Bureau in Wellington today and spilt their blood on the ground to protest against drone assassinations. The activists say the GCSB passes intelligence to the United States that helps it carry out drone strikes in Muslim countries. A Crown witness has denied beating a woman with a cricket wicket, despite her DNA being found on the weapon. Jacqueline Keats is giving evidence at the High Court in Auckland, where Nicola Jones is accused of masterminding the kidnapping of the woman she believed had slept with her boyfriend. The Canterbury District Health Board is bringing its catering back in-house. The board has announced it will not be renewing its contract with the multinational food giant Compass Group, which ends in June. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Anna. Paul has emailed in saying the people complaining about Donald Trump and the drone assassination program, only now that Donald Trump is the president, why no such similar complaints when Obama was president? And in fact, the drone assassination program was indeed going then. Thank you, Paul, and thank you for all your feedback. Let's talk business now. We're joined now to end the week by our business editor, Giles Beckford from Wellington. Giles, welcome to the end of the week. What are we talking about tonight?
We're talking about alleged market manipulation and the first case brought by the Financial Markets Authority against a fund manager, a man called Mark Warminger, who was working for Milford Asset Management. Now, the FMA, which is now the watchdog, the financial market policeman, alleged that Mr. Warminger manipulated prices on the stock exchange, and they brought 10 specific allegations against him, where they said that he had attempted to alter the price, to manipulate the price so that he could enhance the returns that he got on trades that he was making. Now, it's quite technical. We won't go into the details, but suffice to say that the High Court held a 1-month hearing on this. It's a civil case and not a criminal case, and the judgment's been delivered today. Mr. Warminger has been found to have manipulated 2 occasions where he's been proven to the court's satisfaction of playing with prices. The other 8 have not been proven and have been dismissed. At this stage, we don't know what the penalties, if any, there will be. The judge has said that will be a case for another day. But it should be said that this is really the Financial Markets Authority, who were tipped off by the New Zealand Stock Exchange to what they regarded as some unusual trading practices going on and some unusual trade price movements. They were tipped off, and this is the Financial Markets Authority trying to flex its muscle. It says it was about promoting good market conduct so that investors can have confidence in our stock exchange, which we have to say is a pretty small one. It's thinly traded, it's dominated by big institutional investors, and quite frankly, small investors really are just getting the crumbs off the table for much of what happens on the NZX.
Yeah, thanks, Giles. It's fascinating, that case. I'm just looking at your notes. We hadn't said we were going to discuss this, but have you heard from people today their reaction to this announcement from Judith Collins about doing a better job of tackling sort of base erosion and profit shifting? The multinationals, Apple and Google, always cited as the examples of companies that do it. Is this being discussed?
I wouldn't say broadly, but I had quite a long natter with David Snell, who's an executive director of accounting and business services firm EY.
Yeah.
Now, his view was that this was really the minimum the government could do. It couldn't do nothing on the issue. He thinks they're quite reasonable proposals, although he says that, interestingly, on such issues as transfer pricing, which is where basically a parent company loads the price of the goods or services it sells its subsidiary in New Zealand, and hence it transfers the profits back that way. He says that IRD has already had quite considerable powers to be able to investigate such issues and hasn't used them. So he's perhaps a little bit cautious about what extra powers it really needs and how it will implement them. He says this is generally in line with what's happening overseas. The OECD is the lead body in this one internationally. It's looking for some uniformity of tax rules and the way multinationals are treated. So He gives it a thumbs up, but he does caution that it will probably add to business costs. It may deter some people from coming to do business here, and almost certainly will cause some overseas firms to have to restructure their business arrangements here to comply with the law. But it gives the Inland Revenue certainly a lot more muscle to be able to go and police these things and take action.
Thanks, Charles. Appreciate that. How did the markets end the week?
Well, we mentioned Snapchat yesterday. We mocked it. We laughed at it. It went up. It went up 40% on its price today. So
look, I have 2 teenage children. Snapchat is huge in our house. Those things go flying past my head constantly from all their various devices. I've no idea what's on them, and I think ignorance is probably bliss. But
I think you're very wise, John. But suffice to say that if you'd bought in at $17 a share today, yesterday you would have been able to sell it at $24.50 a share today. Never mind, there's always tomorrow. Our own top 50 index was down 15 points. The New Zealand dollar is on the back foot. There are a couple of speeches from US Federal Reserve officials overnight, which many people think will beef up the case for a rate rise this month. So that means the US dollar's on the up. Kiwi is down 70.4 US cents, 93.1 Australian. That's business this week.
Thank you so much, Giles Beckford, our business editor. Have a great weekend. A woman says she was out with friends when they kidnapped a teenager from a central Auckland street and took her back to a garage where she was stripped, had her hair cut off and was sexually violated. The woman was eventually found unconscious with critical injuries on a rural road in the Dome Valley. That's north of Auckland, just south of Wellsford, in May of last year. Jacqueline Keats is giving evidence at the High Court in Auckland where Nicola Jones is accused of masterminding the kidnapping of the woman she believed had slept with her boyfriend. Nicola Jones and her friends Cameron Hakeke, Michelle Blom and Julianne Torrance face charges including kidnapping and assaults using a taser and scissors and robbery over the incident. Ms Jones, Ms Blom, Ms Torrance and Wayne Blackett also face charges of sexual violation. Our Auckland court reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Keats, who was serving a prison sentence after admitting her part in the attack, said Miss Blom was a neighbour and their kids played together. She said in May last year she went to a birthday party at Miss Blom's place in Kelston, where all the women got their nails done and some of them smoked methamphetamine before heading into town. The plan was to go clubbing, but on the way there was talk about enacting revenge on a woman who had slept with Miss Jones's boyfriend.
I can't remember the exact words, just talking bad about her, that they just wanted to get her and stuff. And they ever saw her around, that they would get her.
They pulled up on a street behind Auckland's Karangahape Road where Miss Jones got out of the car. Keats told the Crown Prosecutor Brian Dickey that Miss Jones was only gone a short time.
Jones had our victim and put her in the car next to her.
How did she have your victim?
With her arm around her.
Can you describe the way in which she had her arm around her?
With force. Sort of quite pushing with...
Keats said the victim, who can't be identified, was then repeatedly punched by everyone but Miss Blom, who was driving.
I didn't actually see her getting hit, but you could tell she was being hurt. And then I leaned over and hit her a few times, and yeah.
Mr Dickey asked her why.
I think it was just like in the moment, like the peer pressure joining in, as well as being under the influence, so not even having my right of mind, which I don't think any of us did that night.
They drove back to the house in Kelston where the victim spent some time in the boot of the car before she was taken to the garage area below the house. Keats said she went downstairs to find Julianne Torrance there with the victim, who was stripped naked and had her hair cut off. She was asked how the victim appeared.
Just sad and broken.
You explain that?
Just helpless that she, there was all of us against her, so.
Keats said Miss Torrance told her to sexually violate the woman with a plastic tube, but she refused. She told the court she was disgusted with what had happened and went to her mother's house nearby to shower. Once there, she received a text message from Michelle Blom saying the dog needed babysitting. Keats replied,
That ain't no dog, that's a gutter rat.
She said she then reflected on what had happened.
I sat there and read the Bible. No, I just wanted to try and forget everything that happened.
But under cross-examination from Miss Jones's lawyer, Maria Pekotic, Keats was asked why her DNA was found on a cricket wicket, a weapon that Keats admitted assaulting the victim with.
Well, yeah, I don't know how it is, but maybe I touched it down there, I don't know.
But isn't it the case that you're just minimising your role in that regard and you used one of them?
No.
The cross-examination of Keats will continue on Monday morning. The Crown's case is that the woman was taken to a road in the Dome Valley where she was throttled before being bashed in the head with a hammer 7 times and left for dead. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ahi ko Edward Gay ahau.
16 minutes to 6, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Lots of feedback coming in, and we're going to give you a sample of it just for a bit of a change of tone, really. Elizabeth said, "Hi, John, I've got a free ticket for you to the Westport races next Friday, the 10th of March, if you want to come." I couldn't think of much nicer, actually, Elizabeth, than a country race meet on the West Coast. It'd be magic. Re-alcohol at events. The police seem to have too much control on events. Their pressure seems to have killed the Wellington Seven, says Doug. Alcohol problems are a result of the Kiwis' let's get smashed drinking culture, not event control and BYO permission. The change needs to happen at home first, says Kim. Thank you for your feedback. It's lovely to hear from you and lovely to have you with us. Residents in a quiet Auckland neighbourhood had a rude awakening this week when work on a building site started before the crack of dawn. Housing New Zealand is developing a site in Mount Albert for social housing, and construction got underway late last year. That's very welcome, of course, but on Wednesday morning, subcontractors tasked with pouring contract arrived well before the scheduled start time. Our reporter Sarah Robson went to find out what's going on.
Ida Duckworth lives across the road from the construction site. She usually gets up around 5 and goes out to get the paper. Earlier this week, she noticed a big, noisy concrete truck with flashing lights arrive at the building site very early.
Shortly after that, actually I just got back inside and I heard this real loud noise start. It must have been the pump starting, getting it ready to pump. And then the trucks with the concrete started arriving. It was pumping. And loud pumping. I couldn't believe it, actually. I thought, I can't be going to work at 5:30 in the morning.
Ida Duckworth says while the building work has created a bit of noise, it hadn't been too much of a problem until then.
It's never been that early before. That's why when I came back in, it was at 5:15, and I thought, well, that's ridiculous. No, they don't need to start at that hour, because they're supposed to start at 7:30. And they usually are around about then. It's not been a bother before then.
Before construction started, neighbours were sent letters outlining the work, including the time each day building would start and finish. Grant Miller, the Managing Director of Precision Construction, the principal contractor for the Housing New Zealand project, says the subcontractors doing the concrete pumping turned up early without permission.
They were arranged to turn up at a certain time in the morning. They arrived an hour early and began pouring without our permission at that time.
Grant Miller says it was an isolated incident and his company is aware it needs to stick to the conditions of its resource consent, which details what time work can start and what time it needs to finish each day. He says the company is putting in place extra measures to ensure everyone working on the site, including subcontractors and their employees, is aware of those conditions.
Sometimes we'd hire a concrete placer and he in turn hires a concrete pump person, and we don't know that the downstream communication has been done, so we'll be requiring in future for all the subcontractors to sign off to acknowledge that they are aware of those conditions.
Grant Miller says the company has written apology letters to residents, but Ida Duckworth says she has yet to see one. According to Auckland Council rules, noisy construction work is only allowed during certain hours in residential areas, from 7:30 in the morning until 6 in the evening, although some low-level noise is permitted before and after those times. At weekends, construction work is allowed between 7:30 and 6 on Saturdays, but not on Sundays. However, there can be variations to this, depending on the conditions of the resource consent. The council says it responds to noise complaints within the hour, no matter what time of day, and abatement notices can be issued in cases where there have been breaches. In a statement, Housing New Zealand said it expects contractors and subcontractors to follow Auckland Council rules and regulations, including starting and finishing times. For Checkpoint, Sarah Robson, aho.
Last week on Checkpoint, we brought you the story of a tight-knit community at the foothills of Auckland's Waitakere Ranges out west who are fighting the building or construction, of a water treatment plant. Watercare has 4 options, but 2 of those options would mean destroying up to 18 homes. Cherished homes, of course. Zach Fleming visited Parker Road to meet 2 families fighting desperately to stay.
Parker Road is a long cul-de-sac at almost the very western edge of what most consider to be Auckland. Half an hour's drive from the Sky Tower, there's no footpath, no curbs, But what there is a seemingly endless amount of signs and pickets lining it. Almost every one of the road's 213 homes has one, slogans like "Please care, water care." Tina Lee Viskovich grew up on Parker Road. Her family moved there in the 40s.
Children are starting to have panic attacks. They're watching all of their parents cry. It's just so unfair. And the older people are going in for suspected heart attacks. Everybody in this whole street is on a knife's edge. For 3 weeks, nobody has slept. Everybody's just beside themselves with worry.
The 90-year-old Huia water treatment plant in Titirangi needs replacing. Dozens of options have been narrowed down to 4. 2 sites on Parker Road, which would see up to 18 homes demolished, upgrade the plant at its current site, or build across the road, which is native bush. All 4 cost more or less the same, around $300 million. The reason Tina and other residents are so concerned is because Parker Road has been identified by engineers as the preferred option.
Hundreds of my friends, hundreds of my brother's friends and hundreds of my parents' friends call this their second home. And it's just a roof for anybody that needs it. Yeah. My mum's just taken in a foster child this year as well, who's already been to too many different houses this year. And we've promised him this is his forever home, and now he's standing out on the front lawn with a sign saying, "Please don't take my home."
If Parker Road is chosen, Watercare could take any homes it needed under the Public Works Act.
Even if they wanted to pay 4 times what it's worth, it will never be what it's worth to us. We don't want to move. And if for whatever value as well, it's just going to be too hard to buy in Auckland. And it's not only us that are going, there's the wood pigeon that lives in that guava tree over there. Where's he going to go for 4 years while they're painting paradise to put up a parking lot for a water treatment plant?
Tina believes it's near on impossible to find a community like hers.
I represent New Zealand in karate, and the day that I got named in the national team, tractors and ride-on lawnmowers came rolling up the driveway, and everybody just helped. And they said, "What can we do to get you there?" And they fundraised for me to go to 5 World Championships, Brazil, Japan, Germany, all over. And I'm so lucky. I wouldn't have gone without this community.
Then there's the houses themselves, some of which are literally irreplaceable. A few hundred metres up the road from Tina's family home is neighbour Julian Paree. He says he spent 20 years designing his dream home and the past 14 years building it, much of it by hand out of a barn which he built himself.
I've been planning to be in Oratia for a long, long time. We lived in Glen Eden, in our one and only house up till now for 35 years, and always I knew, in some sort of secret knowledge, that there was one last valley left in Oratia. And just at the right time, we spotted an ad for this property.
67-year-old Julian is a potter. The house is built using a technique called rammed earth, which dates back to around 5000 BC. Moulds are built and earth literally rammed into them. The result is beautiful, looks similar to sandstone, and is environmentally friendlier than every other common building technique.
Well, I call it my magnum opus. It's the big one. I'm not going to be able to do something like this again. It's a one-off. It's full of little things that I've had to invent.
And Julian's home is so unique, universities have asked him to give students tours.
We had a class here yesterday. They're the 4th class that have come, and basically this is their rammed earth chapter for their quantity surveying course. So we get a little lecture in the workshop. They look at the plans, they look at the actual raw material and the technical nature of assembly and how it all goes together, and then they come up to the house and just have a good look around.
And what's their usual reaction?
Ooh, ah. They love it. They're young, and from their point of view, it's like something out of Harry Potter.
Julian, Tina and all their neighbours say they're doing everything they possibly can to try and convince Watercare to not choose Parker Road. Watercare says there's no preferred option and they'll continue consulting the community up until they make their decision in around 3 months. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
And if you were watching those lovely pictures, they were shot by Bradley White. A Decile 1 Auckland school says it's been 2 years since it received Ministry of Education funding to maintain its school pool, and it's now really struggling to keep the facility open. Water Safety New Zealand says there were 81 preventable drownings in the country last year, one of the highest rates per capita in the developed world. But a Glen Innes school principal says keeping his school pool up and running comes at a really significant financial cost. Money is tight. In this community, Laura Tupou reports.
Well, this is free swim time at lunchtime. The kids who are regular with their training, they come in and they get some extra time just to either work on their strokes or just relax. In some cases, it's just playtime. So look, the weather's nice and warm. We have a facility, why not give them every chance to use it?
The principal of Glen Innes School in Auckland, John Hendricks, was on lunchtime pool duty today. The Ministry of Education's Pauline Cleaver says around 60% of all New Zealand schools have pools. She says those 1,300 schools get extra funding as part of their annual property maintenance grant, and schools may also use their capital funding to maintain the pools. But John Hendricks says that doesn't come anywhere near the $8,000 to $10,000 it costs each year to maintain the 15 by 6 metre pool at his Decile 1 school.
No, it does not cover the cost because no longer through our grant is the money specifically put aside calculating the fact that you have a pool. So before, they would have given you a monetary allocation for having a pool on site. That has been removed, I think as late as 2015, that was taken out of that grant.
So you no longer get any extra funding for having a pool?
No, which is unfortunate because the onus then falls back on us to find that money within our operation grant to be able to fund the things we need to do, both not only the pool but also the rest of the academic program.
John Hendricks says while having a pool comes at a cost of resourcing other areas, his 219 pupils are better off with a pool on site. As a contrast, in Hamilton, Decile 10 Tamahere Country Model School is fundraising $500,000 to build 2 new pools, one for the juniors and one for the seniors. Principal Waveney Parker says the current pool is too shallow and senior students scrape their hands at the bottom. A deeper pool will build their confidence when they swim in the ocean.
But we value swimming, and if we can make a difference for kids and save lives, and so if they go to the beach later on, you're hearing all these drowning statistics. Well, there's so many children in New Zealand who are now not really experiencing deep water or pushing themselves in the ability to swim.
Waveney Parker says the school has already raised $200,000 selling a cookbook. It hopes to raise the remaining $300,000 to provide a facility to the wider community as well. The Water Safety New Zealand's John T. Mills says 130 school pools are currently at risk of closing. He says more and more children are coming out of the education system without the basic foundation of water safety skills, which will only lead to a spike long-term in preventable drowning statistics. The Ministry of Education says it's looking into why Glen Innes School hasn't received extra funding for pool maintenance for 2 years. In the meantime, the school's pupils hope their facility doesn't become a statistic.
I like learning new ways to swim because it's just fun to practice it, and then when I actually learn how to do it properly, that's the fun.
Why is it important that you know how to swim properly?
Otherwise you'll drown when you're in the ocean. Yeah.
Do you guys go to the beach or the waterfall?
Yes.
And do you feel confident swimming at the beach?
Yes.
Mō te hotaka o te ahi, ko Laura Tupou aho.
A friend of Steve Jay's, who died during a horrific collision involving a tourist driver earlier this week, has set up a Give a Little page to help his family. Almost $15,000 has already been raised. The collision on the coastal highway in the Tasman district outside Nelson on Monday involved a light truck, a four-wheel drive vehicle towing a caravan and a rental car. 2 people were left dead and several injured. The police have laid charges against an American tourist over the crash. A 63-year-old man will appear in the Nelson District Court on Monday. Christchurch reporter Logan Church spoke to Georgie Kirby, a family friend of Steve Jay's.
When the accident happened, everybody was really shocked and devastated and wanted to offer some kind of help. But at the same time, you don't want to kind of inundate the family with pop-ins and visitors and, flowers and things. So the idea was that this was something that people who wanted to do something, some kind of gesture could do, that would actually be really helpful to Monique and the boys.
And of course, it must be such a small community. What's it been like, I suppose, being around this all? It must be terrible.
It is terrible. I mean, everyone, heard about the accident and how horrific it was. So, the fact that there were 2 fatalities, and definitely everybody knows, someone that's been affected by it really. That's what it feels like anyway.
And has this been something that's happened before in the area, or is this a sort of first off?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I guess, tourists are out on the open road a lot, so any accident is going to be at an open road speed, But no, I don't think it's something that is rampant really here, yeah.
How are the family holding up?
It is to be expected, really. They're still in a lot of shock, a big shock, and but I think the response from the Give a Little page and just people rallying around and showing that they care has helped. It's like a light in a dark place.
That was a friend, Georgie Kirby, talking to our reporter Logan Church. Coming up to 6 o'clock, Paul has sent in a text, I think, saying, spare a thought for the concrete workers who have to get up very early to ease our housing crisis. You just have to roll over, reach your earmuffs and go back to sleep. Fair point, Paul, if you happen to have very good earmuffs. Coming up to 6 after 6, Judith Collins on these new tax measures against multinationals who move their profits offshore.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Public servants are welcoming the decision to demolish Defence House, but say it's taken a long time to reach. The Defence Force has confirmed the 10-year-old building on Aitken Street, which was badly damaged in the November 14th earthquake, will be demolished. Its owner, AMP Capital, says repairs were not economically viable. The Public Service Association's National Secretary, Glenn Barclay, says his members were wondering why it took so long to reach a decision, but they are pleased to finally have some certainty around the building's future. The government's plan to crack down on multinational tax avoidance has been broadly welcomed by tax experts, but one says it may go too far. The Revenue Minister, Judith Collins, has revealed a suite of proposals which would beef up Inland Revenue's powers. Under the plan, if a multinational is being uncooperative, IRD will be able to determine how much tax it should pay, unless the company can prove otherwise. A PwC tax partner, Jeff Nightingale, says the plan certainly has teeth, and in fact they may even be too sharp.
How do you define an uncooperative company? And that's where they have to be very careful, because once someone gets deemed uncooperative, then some quite strong powers come to play around the Commissioner's ability to demand information, make a tax assessment and collect the tax.
Jeff Nightingale says overall the package seems to strike the right balance. The United States Attorney General Jeff Sessions has admitted speaking with the Russian ambassador twice last year, but says it was as a senator and not as representative of the Trump campaign. Mr. Sessions says he won't take any part in any investigation into alleged Russian interference during the US presidential election last year. He had testified at his confirmation hearing in January that he had no communications with the Russians. Leading Democrats are now accusing him of perjury. Mr. Sessions says he was taken aback by allegations that he had been meeting Russian officials as Mr. Trump's surrogate and did not provide enough detail at his confirmation hearing.
In retrospect, if I should have slowed down and said, but I did meet one Russian official a couple of times.
Jeff Sessions, the US President Donald Trump, says his Attorney General is victim of a witch hunt. Dozens of people blocked the entrance to the Government Communications Security Bureau in Wellington today and spilt their blood on the ground to protest against drone strikes. The activists say the GCSB passes intelligence to the United States that helps it carry out drone attacks across the Middle East. A spokesperson for Drone Assassination Awareness Week, Forrest Chambers, says the group is praying for the victims of the attacks and for the staff of the GCSB. A Crown witness has denied beating a woman with a cricket wicket despite her DNA being found on the weapon. Jacqueline Keats is giving evidence at the High Court in Auckland, where Nicola Jones is accused of masterminding the kidnapping of the woman she believed had slept with her boyfriend. Edward Gay has been in court.
Keats is currently serving a prison sentence after admitting her part in the attack. She told the court she was with Miss Jones, Michelle Blom and Julianne Torrance in Auckland City when they pulled a teenager off the street and took her back to Miss Blom's West Auckland address. Keats said once there the woman was stripped, had her hair cut and was sexually violated. Under cross-examination from Miss Jones's lawyer Maria Pekotic, Keats denied beating the victim with a cricket wicket, although she's admitted a charge of assault with a weapon. She also denied minimising her involvement in the attack. Atu i te kōti mātua ko Edward Gay aho.
Work on a new roadside safety barrier near Tauranga has come to a halt after a potential defensive trench from the 1800s was found. The site on State Highway 29A in Matapihi has previously been identified as being in an area of archaeological significance for 3 hapu. The Transport Agency stopped work as soon as the trench was discovered, and cultural protocols were enacted with the hapu. The project archaeologist Sean Keith says the site, which is about 40 metres long, will be evacuated and all details will be recorded before it's filled back in. Ms Keith says she cannot find any record of the trench but believes it dates between 1830s and 1860s.
It sits on the very edge of the state highway between the coast of the inland Tauranga Harbour, cliff edge and the highway, running parallel along. So it's obviously defending the coastline. I've never seen anything like this before.
Archaeologist Sean Keith. It is 6:05. The All Blacks Sevens coach Scott Waldrum concedes losing captain Scott Curry is a blow, but he's confident it's one they can overcome this weekend in Las Vegas. Curry has been ruled out with concussion. New Zealand are 4th in the overall standings and play Kenya, Russia and Argentina in pool play, with the tournament spread over 3 days in the Olympic format. Waldrum says Curry's omission is precautionary and gives veteran and former skipper DJ Forbes a chance to take over the captaincy.
It was decided best to not risk it and make it worse this weekend and have him hopefully fresh and available for Canada. So it's not a bad thing. We still get to bring in a guy who's been in and around the squad as well. Scott
Waldrum. The New Zealand women's team have made just one change to their team for Las Vegas, with Renee Wickliffe replacing the injured Katerina Fata-Simpkins. The All Black lock Patrick Tuipulotu returns to rugby tonight for the Blues match with the Chiefs in Hamilton. He was provisionally suspended after he initially failed a drugs test on the All Blacks end-of-year tour before his B sample came back negative, clearing him to play. Off-spinner Jitin Patel and all-rounder Jimmy Neesham have been recalled to the New Zealand Test cricket squad for the 3-match series against South Africa starting in Dunedin next week. Parramatta forward New Zealander Kenny Edwards has been suspended for the first 7 games of the National Rugby League season after pleading guilty to domestic violence-related assault charges. And that's the news.
Tomorrow morning, veteran New Zealand doctor and women's health pioneer Carol Shand talks about why she's a feminist. American author and critic Jessa Crispin explains why she's not. Phil Pennington with his on-the-ground experience of the Kaikoura quake. And poet Bill Manhire set to music. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
And now the Met Service short forecast to midnight tomorrow. Northland, fine weather but isolated afternoon showers. Auckland, Coromandel and Waikato, also Wellington, Wairarapa, fine today but cloudy for the rest of the North Island. Fine for Nelson and Marlborough. Bulla and Westland, showers turning to rain in Westland for a time. Fine spells tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, cloud increasing today with scattered showers south of Banks Peninsula and fine weather tomorrow. Southland and Fiordland, rain turning to a few showers this evening and becoming confined to Fiordland and the south coast. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It is 6:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much, Anna Thomas. It's lovely having you with us. Are you back next week?
I'm back next week.
Have a good weekend and we'll
Thanks
see you
so
Monday.
much. You too.
Thank you. The Revenue Minister says her proposals to clamp down on multinational tax avoidance can achieve the same or better results as introducing a diverted profits tax. Now, that is now before Parliament in Australia. We'll look at that next week and what exactly it does. But Judith Collins today unveiled proposals aimed at big multinational corporates who are legally, and that's important, getting away with not paying an estimated $300 million a year in tax in New Zealand. We heard from the OECD before, base erosion and profit shifting. In short, what you do is you declare your profits in low tax territories and you move your costs to high tax territories. It is legal, but the loopholes that allow it to happen are being closed. I spoke to the Minister and asked her exactly what she's looking at tightening up on.
Where we've got international companies or multinational companies who are trading in New Zealand and where they have been perhaps charging too much to their New Zealand operations so that their profit in New Zealand is much lower than one would expect otherwise, where that's basically a transfer pricing, where they're charging too much interest on loans to those New Zealand operations. These are the sorts of things that we're going to go after. Now, that means that their profit is much lower than it should be in New Zealand. They don't pay as much tax as they should be, and they divert the profit off to overseas other countries where there's a much lower tax rate. So basically, it's thwarting the system. So we're putting in some measures to deal with that, and we're giving Inland Revenue very substantial powers when they don't get cooperation from some of these multinational companies for Inland Revenue to assess the tax and for the companies to have to prove that it's not right. So that's a big change, that one, and it is necessary when you're dealing with multinational.
Yeah, can I use the example of Apple, who, and I'm using the financial year ended 27 September 2014, their revenue in New Zealand was $568 million. Their cost of sales, though, was $551 million. It's very, very difficult. In fact, it's been impossible to get Apple to tell us what the cost of sales were, why it's so very high. In fact, about 96% of their revenue. How will this new measure address that kind of carry-on?
Well, that's the sort of example, and of course I don't want to deal with any individual examples, but if there was something like that where Inland Revenue might suspect that there is some we could say jiggery-pokery, frankly, going on around moving the cost of business onto New Zealand operations, then Inland Revenue will be asking those questions.
So, in fact, Inland Revenue will be able to go into whatever company we're talking about, and let's just be hypothetical here and say, show us what those costs are. Are they true New Zealand costs?
Correct. And they also will be putting in some measures around limiting the amount of interest that's charged and limiting the true costs, or the costs that are being passed on. So they will be able to look behind the veneer of the invoice.
Which is consistent with what the OECD is trying to work on right across the G20, and I know that New Zealand has been active in those talks. So this is the kind of prescription that the OECD is hoping will end base erosion and profit shifting across the board.
Yes, and by working with the OECD and their multilateral approach, it actually gives New Zealand, a little country that is significantly smaller than some of the companies that we're talking about, some ability to actually make things happen, because we will be working with other countries and making sure our double tax agreements are all changed at the same time to make sure that we can do these sorts of things. So we couldn't do everything just by ourselves. That would be ridiculous, but we can work with others on it.
Why has it taken until now to do this? Because it's been apparent and it's been discussed and it's been very much on the record for a year or two now that this sort of thing was going on. And New Zealand has been in what I understand are constructive talks with the OECD about a participation in this kind of thing. Why is it only happening now?
Well, I can't tell you exactly why it's happening now, but I can say that there's a huge workload that Inland Revenue has around the policy changes that it's making. But, we're signing up. We expect to sign up to this multilateral agreement in June this year. So you can see it takes a long time when you're dealing across countries. But also, we want to make sure that we didn't go rushing in, do something that's actually just going to say to multinationals, just don't come here. We're happy to have them here. We just want them to pay their fair share of tax.
What do you think this will be worth to New Zealand each year?
Well, I think that's a great question, isn't it? Inland Revenue believe it will be, with these measures that we've talked about, around about close to about 300 million a year. It could well, as they say to me, they don't know what they don't know, but it could be more, it could be less. But I think anything around that $200 to $300 million a year is a substantial amount of money, makes a big impact into our budget.
Judith Collins, Revenue Minister. A lovely email's just come in from Brian. Hi, John. Just heard your piece on GI, Glen Innes Primary School, and recalled how my parents and many others raised the funds to build that pool. That was 1956, 1957. So what's that, 60 years ago? We all learnt to swim there, followed by thousands of others over the past 60 years. Just give the hard-pressed principal what he needs to keep that pool open, even for old time's sake, from a very different New Zealand. Keep your eye on this one for us, John. Regards, Brian. Thank you, Brian. 60 years ago, Brian's mum and dad and others raised the funds to build that pool. It's been 3 years in the making, but the new Lord single Green Light has received rave reviews in the hours following its global release. Probably not from her target market, but nonetheless, The Guardian called Green Light big tent pop and gave it 4 stars. NME called it unexpected, euphoric rocket. The Atlantic used words like glorious, blissful and joyfully. And Billboard said a brilliant songwriter enters her prime. Remember, she's only 20. It's the Aucklander's first release since her debut album Pure Heroine in 2013. Actually, she had a song track for one of the, what's the dystopian film series? Hunger Games. Yeah, she had something since then. But Pure Heroine was her debut. Royals from that, of course, went to #1 in the US. Our reporter Tom Furley took Lord's much-awaited offering to the streets to see if they gave Green Light a green light.
Slowly teased over the course of a week, Lord finally released the first single of her album early this morning and shot straight to the top of iTunes, Twitter and YouTube. Green Light is a slight change of tack, more mainstream pop than fans are accustomed to hearing. But music critic Nick Bollinger says her upcoming album Melodrama will have as big an impact as her last album Pure Heroine, which is now 3 years old.
One of the things that stood out about Royals and the whole Pure Heroine album was its sort of minimalism, and that was her point of difference. But in a way, what she seems to be doing here is taking on the Taylor Swifts and Katy Perrys and sort of beating them at their own game. This is an enormous production, really big and polished, but there's also a lot of substance in the song too.
And the release of the single is almost as interesting as the single itself. Fans have been eagerly waiting since the now 20-year-old suddenly appeared on free-to-air TV in a short advertisement. Then a website came, followed by bizarre local events at 3 Auckland locations on Wednesday night. Auckland University's senior marketing lecturer Bodo Lang says the teasing was novel, but poorly executed.
Basically, when people are hunting around, you need to give them something, you need to elevate them, and you need to give them talking points. And I think that's what was missing here. They were hunting around, there were green lights at the beach that, were taking pictures of, and that's great, but there was nothing really that provided a lot of talking points for fans that could have then gone viral. I mean, there could have been a lot of things could have been done, I think, to really drive a lot more electronic word of mouth, and I don't think that's what they did.
But he says it was successful in the sense it gave her vast amounts of free advertising from the media.
I think it's really interesting to see that, how much media coverage she has received because of the apparent slight problems of the teasing, of the green lights at the beach and fans rushing around trying to catch a glimpse of her and all this sort of stuff. Because of that, she has received a lot of media attention, and she wouldn't have received that otherwise. So if you just look at it just cold-heartedly in terms of the number of people who've paid attention to it, I think it's certainly been a success.
This afternoon we took the single to Auckland's Albert Park, where 16-year-old student Jared Doble donned my headphones for a listen.
It's a banger. It's a banger. Is it a bop though?
It's got like a beat thing going on now.
What did you reckon?
I thought it was good. Yeah. I liked it. It was like classic, like it was like her old stuff, but it wasn't like exactly the same.
As a 16-year-old, Lord went triple platinum in the US and won 2 Grammy Awards. Her hit song Royals turned into a 7 times platinum record-breaking single, making Lord the first New Zealander to achieve #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 since 1987. For those RNZ spoke to in Albert Park, the new song was a slight departure from the last tracks.
So I don't think it's better, but it's like equal.
It was catchy. The stuff is quite quirky, and that was, I was a bit more mainstream.
Yeah, no, it was cool. The build up from the first verse up to the bridge, up to the chorus was pretty sweet. I was used to jam her first album quite a lot, so yeah, no, I'm looking forward to the rest of the album.
I did like it. It's not as good as Royals, I'll say that, but I did like it and I think it will be a hit.
Lord's record label Universal Music declined to comment today. Recorded Music New Zealand, which runs the country's top 40, says the song missed the cut for this week's chart, so people will have to wait until next Friday to see if Lord's latest has fans giving her return the green light. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
A little burst of green light there at the end. It's gone into the top 5 on iTunes in the US already. What's been out about 12 hours now, already in the top 5 on iTunes in the US. Nick Bollinger talking about the similarity to Taylor Swift. Well, the fact that she's pursuing a similar kind of big pop genre. Jack Antonoff is the co-producer of the new Lord material, and of course has co-produced Taylor Swift in the past. We interviewed Rolling Stones' BRITTANY SPANOS earlier in the program, and that interview is online. She too was raving about it. After 13 years, the Canterbury District Health Board has ended its contract with food provider Compass Group, choosing instead to manage the services in-house. So the Canterbury DHB giving Compass Group the flick. The DHB's Chief Executive Dave Mates says the hospital now has facilities to do its own catering, which will save money and give them control over the food on offer. Mr Mates told our reporter Logan Church that the Health Board intends to offer jobs to all 300 catering employees, and the public shouldn't notice any changes.
What we've, through extensive analysis and review, we've got to a point where providing that in-house enables us to keep the same sort of food offer and continue to provide match the food offer with the changes in the way that we're delivering services.
So you're basically saying that the District Health Board can now do that, I suppose, better than Compass?
So we're essentially picking up what Compass has been doing for us for the last quite a number of years, and that's what we're looking to continue to make sure is provided to our community.
So then this change doesn't have anything to do with, I suppose, the reported complaints towards Compass about the quality of food it has served at other DHBs? I'm sure you've seen in the media some examples.
It has. No, this decision has had nothing to do with issues that have been raised elsewhere around the country. In fact, the relationship we've had with Compass here has been long-standing, and with the process that we're looking at is we're bringing all of their staff into the in-house operation.
So then why not just, if it's all going well, why not just renegotiate?
In terms of the kind of the national agreement, it didn't quite meet the needs that we had here, and we also own all of the kitchen facilities and the large cook chill operation in Canterbury, which does make it much more cost effective for us to be doing in the long term.
That's the DHB's Chief Executive, Canterbury DHB, David Mates, talking to our reporter Logan Church. Compass Group says their patient satisfaction is outstanding and they're proud of their service quality. It's 6:21 on Checkpoint on Friday night. Smoking remains the single leading cause of death globally, which is pretty staggering when you think about it, given all the studies, all the warnings, all the medical advice we've had for decades. Now, the introduction of plain cigarette packaging has been one of the major blows against the tobacco companies who fought tooth and nail everywhere it's been introduced to prevent it being allowed. Now, the first study into the effect of plain packaging in Australia has found strong links between the role of brand identities and smoker behaviour. This report from the ABC's Caroline Winter.
Sam Martino has been a smoker for years, and at times he's been a fan of particular brands. But when plain packaging tobacco laws were introduced in Australia in 2012, that changed.
Yeah, it was definitely confusing. You couldn't tell which was what, because if it was Benson Hedges, it was gold. If it was Marlboro, it was red and white,
While confusing, it wasn't enough for him to stop.
If you were a smoker already, you were still going to smoke. It wasn't because of the deterring of the packaging or them covering the actual with screens. If you were, like I said, if you were a smoker, you were still going to smoke.
The brand of cigarette may now not matter to Sam Martino, but a new study by the Australian National University has found brand identity is linked to changes in smoker behaviour.
What's distinctive about our study is it demonstrates that brand identity changes might be what's driving this effect. For the first time, it gives us an insight into why plain packaging has been a real success.
Lead researcher Hugh Webb says it's been shown that plain packaging has led to a drop in smoking and an increase in smokers trying to quit. But this study drills down to the role of brand identities in smoker behaviour after plain packaging was introduced.
The key thing that we found was that people's sense of identification with their brand decreased over that time. We also found that the positive stereotypes that they made about their brand decreased over that time. And thirdly, we found people's smoking behaviour decreased and that these things were linked.
Researchers surveyed 178 smokers before and again after the introduction of plain packaging. Mr Webb says over that time, 29 people reported they'd quit smoking and brand identification was a main reason. Like a favourite clothing label, Mr Webb says the type of cigarette a smoker enjoys to smoke particularly defines their sense of self. And this research goes to the heart of how powerful marketing can be.
This, alongside other strategies that governments can use to reduce tobacco use, is that tapping into these brand identities and stripping the meaning of brands away can really make people confront the nature of the product that they're using.
Less than 13% of Australians are daily smokers. The Cancer Council says the smoking rate drops around 1% a year, with a quarter of that attributed to plain packaging. The Council's CEO, Professor Sanchia Aranda, says this research helps answer why plain packaging has shown positive results.
We predicted that it would have an impact, but we predicted that that impact would predominantly be in young people who hadn't yet taken up smoking. So it was very gratifying to see that it also had an impact on existing smokers.
Dreaming Big could see one young Māori spend the day with an Olympic athlete, high-profile actor, or the New Zealander of the Year, Taika Waititi. A social media campaign funded by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment is challenging young Māori to share their dreams and aspirations. I've got some heavy hitters on board to encourage would-be entrants. Our Māori Issues correspondent, Mihi Narangi Forbes, with this.
It said you should shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. That's the message broadcaster Stacey Morrison wants to convey to young Māori kids through the Dream Big competition.
Hopefully inspire rangatahi to think about what their dreams are and then to reach for them, because it is a pretty brave thing to put your dreams out there. I guess in terms of Māori, sometimes we get a bit whakamā to do that and to put our head above the parapet. So this is an opportunity to go, no, these people have done well, and it's totally within your scope and your life potential to do that as well.
Tammy Davis, the actor best known as Manta on the hit show Outrageous Fortune, says it's not always easy to express yourself when you're Māori. He says when he worked with budding young movie makers in Whanganui last year, the group experienced negative reactions from people in the community. Mr Davis says dreaming big means rising above the barriers too.
There were a few people who walked past and swore at the kids, said comments that, as if we didn't belong there. And I remember one of the kids coming up to me and they said, I just don't feel comfortable doing this anymore. And I said to them, that's got nothing to do with us. The way those people treated us had nothing to do with us. It was all about them. And just trying to get them to think, just to think differently.
Tammy Davis admits he always dreamed big, beginning with his desire to become a pilot.
I ended up working on a job where I actually got to fly a plane. I never thought I would, and actually, I don't think I'd be the best pilot, to tell you the honest truth, me. But I think for the rangatahi out there, it's just more about being able to kind of follow your dreams and having the courage to believe in yourself.
Ms Morrison also had big dreams when she was young.
First of all, I wanted to be a lawyer, but that was because of LA law. Just looked like I could argue all day, and that sounded like fun. Then I wanted, just to sort of be in stage shows. But I think a lawyer, funnily enough, so it's not really that different from what I ended up doing. It's still a form of communication.
The competition, which runs till mid-March, also includes video from familiar New Zealand personalities who are also big dreamers, such as Māori Development Minister Te Ururo Flavell.
Once upon a time, I had heaps of dreams back in my little town of Nongotaha in Rotorua. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be all sorts of things, and it never ever limited me in my dreams for my future.
Whether politician was on his list of hopes and dreams as a young person, well, he didn't say. But one of the first video entries came from a young woman called Gabriel. Her dream is simple, that Māori reach the same level of success as Pākehā.
Just to normalise Māori in today's society. So I'm starting my Masters in Māori Development so I can do this, so I can make this happen for us.
Tammy Davis says dreaming is easy, getting there takes guts.
If you want to follow your dreams, it's not easy, and it's not going to be easy. And sometimes you're going to do jobs that you don't want to do, and then when you get to that dream job, you get there and you go, oh man, there's times flipping burgers in McDonald's, or there's times setting up lights and stuff, just kind of makes you really understand, and and allows you to work with humility, and those decisions guide you.
The prize for the best online entry is to spend a day with one of the 6 influencers. The winner gets to choose whether it's Stacey Morrison, Tammy Davis, Dr. Lance O'Sullivan, James McConey, Robert Hollis or Lisa Carrington. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei ko mihi Ngārangi Forbes ahau.
A lovely track from Mihi brings the program to an end for the week. We've got some feedback that we're going to conclude with. About time large corporate tax was sorted out. I pray it will assist the less financially fortunate here in New Zealand. And this person says, I'm a shift worker. My wife is a registered nurse. We paid more tax last year than Facebook New Zealand. Go figure. Samantha harks back to my podcast about Apple. Thank you, Samantha, for that very nice comment. I was just struck by the fact that Apple had costs of 96% of their revenue in New Zealand, and I simply wanted to figure out what those costs were. I still don't know. 18 months on, that podcast is online if you want to have a listen to it. And Ahmed says, thank you, John, for showing our Orotia plight with Waterkia. I've lived on Parker Road for 30 plus years, and my wife's grandmother built her home here. I have close friends who stand to lose their homes, which they've had for 5 generations. We will stand strong as Waterkia as a property which has bought decades ago for this particular reason. It's just because the native trees have grown up upon that land that they prefer to uproot people rather than uprooting those trees. I'm furious. Thank you for all your feedback. Thank you for being with us. We really enjoy and appreciate your company. On behalf of our excellent, excellent team, see you on Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government's plan to crack down on multinational tax avoidance has been broadly welcomed by tax experts. The earthquake-damaged Defence House in Wellington will be demolished. The US Attorney General Jeff Sessions recuses himself from the Russian probe. And dozens of people have blocked the entrance to the GCSB offices, protesting against drone strikes. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Is there any logic behind what it costs to see a GP?
We've got plenty of people who are got their luxury yachts down in the marinas around town who are paying $18 a visit.
Does the system need a radical change to make it fairer?
It's going to have to be fixed with money, and the longer it's left, the more the money that has to be injected.
I'm Karen Brown, and Insight looks at GP funding, the patients missing out and the doctors struggling.